carbon fiber plate, singular, because there's only one plate allowed in a legal racing shoe, versus rods, because rods are like fingers and there's multiple rods in a single shoe, and that's still a legal shoe. This is a video that I made quite a long time ago, in the very early days of this channel, getting into the history, at least my perspective of the history as a product designer, as to why Nike has a carbon fiber plate and Adidas developed the energy rod system in the first place. I would encourage you to go check this video out if you're interested in that full story, though keep in mind, as I pointed out, it's one of my earlier videos. It's in the first 3 months of this channel, so things were a little rougher back then. Just keep that in mind when you're watching. But in the almost 2 years since I recorded that video, super shoes have evolved a little bit. There's been some changes, especially now in 2025. We're seeing probably some of the biggest changes in super shoes that we've really ever seen since the Vaporfly 4% came out in 2017. And it's gonna get very, very interesting this year. And specifically, the topic of this video is going to be around some of the new, very soft and very compressive super foams that we're seeing begin to come into super shoes from some brands. Now, back in the day, and this was only just a couple years ago, we pretty much had this. We had ZoomX from Nike on one side and Lightstrike Pro from Adidas on the other. Both very high resilience foams, a lot of energy return, but extremely different feel. ZoomX I equated to sort of a yoga ball where you sink into it and then you bounce out of it, where Lightstrike Pro is always more of a spring where there's almost no sink and it's almost instant energy return in that foam. And they were both beloved and they were both sort of opposite ends of the spectrum, but provided similar results ultimately. And really every other foam sort of fit between those two. But now fast forward into 2025 and it kind of looks like this. As you can see, Nike has moved towards center. ZoomX is now kind of in the middle compared to some of these newer foams. Lightstrike Pro is still all the way over there, and what I call Lightstrike Pro Classic, that's still very firm spring-like. However, I think ASICS's FF Turbo Plus is now really the foam that's the standard firmer foam if you want a firmer foam, because everyone seems to be going softer now. And where this is really relevant is with Adidas and their new Lightstrike Pro. The Lightstrike Pro that's actually in this shoe, the Adios Pro 4, is now much softer than ZoomX. I was actually shocked when I first ran in this shoe. And pushing it even further is Saucony with their new Incrediron foam that's pushing the boundaries of what soft means in a foam, so much so that I've had to add another section to this matrix to the left of bouncy that's just called soft. And I would even argue that I could put Saucony's new foam into yet another section of this matrix that I would just call squishy, because it is that soft. But coming back to this shoe, the Adidas Adios Pro 4, I think overall this shoe has been very well received this year. I think it's been pretty positively reviewed, including on this channel. I'll put a link in the description to my initial impressions review of the shoe. It was very positive. I think this is a great shoe. I think this was a much needed change and update and just change in direction for Adizero from where they were. But it is a massive, massive change from this, the Adios Pro 3, the previous version, in just about every way. The geometry, the upper, the foam, the ride, how you engage the shoe, all of it's different. And I think that's catching a lot of people off guard that have bought this shoe that maybe love the Adios Pro 3, and now they're kind of struggling to make sense of this shoe. In fact, recently I'm beginning to see some comments online where people discuss running shoes saying that this shoe hurts their feet, or why is this shoe so hard to run in? And that's what I thought I would talk about here, because it's actually quite important. As I pointed out in this matrix, you can see the foam that's in the Adios Pro 4 is actually now what I would consider softer than Nike ZoomX, which was the softest super foam previously. And that means that this shoe rides extremely different. Now, the reason for a plate or rods or a stiffening agent in a super shoe is really twofold. And I think people always think of the first one, which is for propulsion. There's the roll forward, the loading of the spring of the spoon of the plate, you're getting that pop off the toe, stiffening the shoe so that it rolls more. I think people always talk about the propulsiveness of a plate or rods. But there's another element that's really important, and we always saw this in the Nike Vaporfly, in that a plate, being one unit, actually adds a bit of stability to the shoe. And I'm not talking stability like a stability shoe, but in a very soft compressive foam, a plate will actually support the foot so that you're engaging the foam as kind of a unit. You're pushing down on all of the material with the surface of the plate, and you're getting a much more stable ride than you would get otherwise in a very soft foam. And I think if you've ever run in a Vaporfly, and then you've run in something like an Invincible run or the Streetfly or the Pegasus Plus, and it doesn't have a plate, you can understand what I'm talking about. But Adidas's technical solution, which was developed back in this shoe, is a very different ride, and I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with, moving from this shoe, the Adios Pro 3, to this shoe, the Adios Pro 4. So let's go back and talk a little bit about the Adios Pro 3. So this was the shoe where the energy rods were really developed, the Energy Rod 2.0 system. And what that is, as you can see here, is literally it's kind of fingers that go into the forefoot. Now that was a very specific Adidas solution because they wanted their marquee design. They wanted their marquee technology that they could own that was different than everyone else. But more importantly, I think it was a really expert engineering decision from Adidas in this shoe with this older, what I call Lightstrike Pro Classic foam. Now the foam in this shoe, the Adios Pro 3, is very much beloved, and I've described it as very spring-like in how its resilience and energy return works. But the other thing about this foam is it is firmer, it is denser. If the Adidas engineers would have put a carbon fiber plate into this shoe, the Adios Pro 3, this would have been way too harsh, way too rigid, because the foam itself provides a lot of structure and rigidity. It doesn't need the added stability and structure of a carbon fiber plate, which is where the rods really come in to this foam, because the rods now allow this shoe to kind of flex somewhat naturally, even though this is a much denser foam across the width of the shoe, and you're getting sort of this independent movement of the fingers of the rods. So that smooths out the roughness of this ride, so you're getting the benefit of all that resilience of Lightstrike Pro. You're getting the propulsive forwardness of the length of the energy rods, but it's not overly harsh to the foot because it's allowing this denser foam to kind of flex or at least move a little bit independently that a carbon fiber plate just wouldn't. But when you move that system to this shoe, the Adios Pro 4, with this much more compressive foam, a foam I would actually describe as now softer than Zoom X, and you don't have the structure or the added stability of a carbon fiber plate in the shoe, you still have the same energy rod system in this shoe. That's where I think the problems are coming from, because now this shoe requires a lot of foot strength. It requires a lot of activation in your foot and in understanding how your foot's actually working in your foot strike and your stride to really get the most out of this shoe. And if you've only been running in something like the Adios Pro 3 or very dense foams with plates and rockers, your foot's never really had to work in a shoe. So you don't understand how to actually activate your foot, or you just don't have the foot strength to get the most out of this shoe. And I think that's why the shoe's being challenging for some runners. Because when you think about it, if you take the carbon fiber plate out of this shoe and you're putting a very soft compressive foam, that means this shoe is actually quite flexible across the width of the shoe. You can't really see it on camera, but when I bend the shoe across the width, there's actually a lot of flex in this shoe. And when I'm actually foot striking in the shoe, I'm a forefoot striker who supinates a little bit, I can actually feel how much this foam is compressing. In fact, the first time I ran in this shoe, I was shocked how soft this shoe is. And I'm someone who talks a lot about foot strength on this channel. I run in low stack shoes. I work on foot strength all the time. I was stunned how much foot strength this shoe really required to really activate. Because now my foot needs to be the stabilizing element. Now my foot needs to make up for the lack of the plate in this very soft compressive foam. Because again, the rods are working like fingers and they're allowing my foot to flex naturally. But the stability and the activation to roll this shoe forward really now has to come from the foot. You're not relying on the plate to do that work. And I think that's where a lot of people that are struggling with this shoe are running into trouble. And that's where I find it really interesting as to why Adidas actually has come out with this, the Adios 9, and they basically made these two shoes really work together as a pair. I actually think that the Adios 9 now is the trainer to the Adios Pro 4, because this shoe is going to teach you about foot activation. It is going to build foot strength. It is going to help you understand your mechanics in your foot strike and your stride so that you can really understand how to activate your foot, so that when you move from the Adios 9 to the Adios Pro 4, you can get the most out of the shoe. That's, I think, really explaining why Adidas has really paired these together from a design language, from a fit standpoint, from a material standpoint. These two shoes, the Adios and the Adios Pro, have never been this closely linked, but they're definitely linked in 2025, and I think it's for this very reason. There's a second issue that I see some people now talking about in this shoe, as I think they're spending more time in this shoe training and maybe compressing the foam a little bit, and that's the energy rods. People are actually beginning to feel the energy rods in the forefoot of this shoe. Now, again, you put a compressive foam with the energy rods, which again act like fingers, and they have dimensionality. They're not like a carbon fiber plate, which can be very flat and actually very thin. Energy rods actually have some height to them. So when you put this very compressive foam with the energy rods, I think a heavier runner, or a runner that's putting a lot more force into the ground, using this for like 5K and faster paces, which it's actually quite good at, you're possibly going to feel or compress the foam enough where you're going to start to feel those rods. In fact, I think the 30 plus mil of foam that's in the forefoot of the shoe is right at the border of what Adidas can do with this shoe, with this new foam, and still make it kind of work where you're not always going to be running into the rods. I'm really curious to feel the new Takumi Sen 11 that will be coming out later this year, because that will have about 27 mil of foam in the forefoot, and it'll have theoretically the same energy rod system. At least that's what we're expecting. And I think that's going to be really challenging to some runners, especially heavier runners, because I think they're going to compress the foam enough where they're really going to feel the rods underfoot. And to illustrate that even more clearly, and I've shown this on the channel before in other videos, but you can see here in the unloaded state, the energy rods actually have more dimensionality than the comparable Nike Fly plate, or really any other carbon fiber plate. Now this is the Adios Pro 4 versus the Nike Vaporfly 3. The Vaporfly 3 has a low plate configuration, so the plate's actually lower in the cross section, but it doesn't really matter because a carbon fiber plate can be much thinner than the actual energy rods that Adidas is using. But when you compress the energy rods, you see that there's a lot of opportunity for compression areas where the foot, which is a very sensitive part of the body, can feel theoretically any sort of dimensionality or any sort of firm or stiff thing that's in the middle of the shoe. And I think that's what some heavier runners, or runners that are maybe breaking down the foam a little bit quicker than others, are definitely feeling. Whereas with the Vaporfly, or really any carbon fiber plate, even if you compress the foam, the kind of area of compression is not going to be as drastic, so it's going to be harder to actually feel the plate. And if anything, you're just going to feel the overall shoe kind of stiffen up, which is actually one of the ride characteristics of a Vaporfly or a low plate configuration shoe in the first place. Now, speaking of soft compressive foams, there's a couple other shoes that we'll be talking about in 2025. Mainly, this is a Vaporfly year. The Nike Vaporfly 4 will be coming out in 2025. And this is going to be that classic low plate configuration, which, by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about with low plate configuration, I'll put a link in the description to a video where I go into the meta speeds and talk about the difference between the Metaspeed Edge and Sky, low plate versus high plate, and what all that means. I encourage you to go check that out. But the Vaporfly 4 will be the classic Vaporfly configuration, though I've been hearing some tweaks have been done to some of the geometry, possibly the plate, and maybe the foam. No one's running this shoe yet, so we'll see once we get it how different it actually is, but I would expect this to feel a little bit more aggressive, and some of that will be because of the tweaks to the midsole and the plate. Now, another shoe that's really going to be pushing this boundary is this shoe, the Saucony Endorphin Elite 2. Now, this has a new foam that Saucony is calling Incredi-Run foam, which I think is the most awful name I've ever heard, but you know, whatever. Now, I have actually seen this shoe. I had it in hand, as you can see here, and this foam, I cannot tell you how compressive and soft it is. If you have ever held a stress ball, one of those soft stress balls, and squeezed that, that's what this foam feels like. In fact, after I took this video, I did manage to put this on my foot. There was only one shoe at this expo booth for Saucony, and it was size and a half too small for me, but I did manage to kind of shove my foot into it, so at least I could step on the shoe and feel how compressive the foam is. So I had a Saucony Endorphin Elite 2 and my standard Nike Pegasus 41 on the other foot because that's what I was wearing casually, and I could feel that shoe just sink into the ground. I didn't feel a plate in that shoe. I didn't feel any stabilizing element. When I went up on my toes and sort of rolled my foot, it just felt like a balloon or a marshmallow. That's what people have been calling it. Now, Saucony is saying that once you get up to speed in that shoe, and I wasn't running in the shoe, I was just kind of standing in place and jumping up and down on my toes, the foam stiffens up, and some of that is the plate. But we're going to have to see on this one, because this one is also, I think, going to challenge a lot of runners that don't have high foot strength. And what makes the Endorphin Elite 2 even more interesting is that it's still using the same carbon fiber plate, which Saucony calls their slotted carbon fiber plate from the Endorphin Elite 1, as you can see here. It's got 4 sort of fingers or wings on it, but it is a carbon fiber plate. Now, as I was saying, when I was bouncing up and down on my tiptoes in that shoe, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel like there was a plate in that shoe, but I also didn't feel like there were rods in that shoe. I didn't feel anything in that shoe. I just felt soft foam underfoot. Now, theoretically, this should be a blend of a flatter, non-dimensional carbon fiber plate, but give you some of that independent movement of the fingers of the rods. The Endorphin Elite 1 was too stiff. The foam in that was it just didn't really optimize for that shoe. So you could never really experience that. But in this shoe, you're definitely going to experience that. And if that works, this should be quite interesting for some runners. But again, it's going to require a lot of foot strength and especially toe strength. If you have any toe mobility issues whatsoever, the Saucony Endorphin Elite 2 is going to be a big problem for you, even more so than the Adios Pro 4 or a Vaporfly. So to look at all of these together, if we see kind of the 3 primary plate configurations that we're going to be dealing with in 2025, we have the classic Nike Fly plate, which is a one-piece carbon fiber plate. ASICS is also using that, though there could be some tweaks in some of the new ASICS shoes. We should know about those pretty soon. Adidas is the only one using the energy rods, and Saucony is using their slotted plate technology. But also Puma uses a fork plate, Hoka uses some split plates. They actually use ones that are independent medial and lateral plates. They have all sorts of things going on, and there's some other brands that are playing with fork plates and that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, these are the 3 plate configurations that we're going to see kind of evolve a bit in 2025 into 2026. And each one of these is going to have a very different ride and require very different mechanics and foot strength to really activate them in the best way. As I said in the upfront, I think this plate versus rods video thing will become a series, because beyond this soft compressive foam topic, I think there's at least 2 or 3 other topics that I'm seeing evolve in super shoes and plate dynamics and configurations that will be worth talking about this year. So expect a couple more of these, probably another in the spring, one in the summer, probably 1 or 2 in the fall, depending on what we actually see release. But there's a lot of really interesting super shoe tech coming out for racing in 2025. And as I've been talking about, I think it's just the start of where we're headed in this next generation of geometries, materials, and foams. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.